I'm weird, it's just him and the bear. So I've been wanting to get my braces off, so I've been like, there's a chick. We're in the same, in the spring, it's speaking to her.
Good evening. We'll call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Allendale Public Schools commit to educate, inspire, and support all students. Amy, you got the roll? Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members of the audience are welcome to make comments at the time designated on the agenda. Please register at the sign-up sheet at the door when you walk in. Limit your comments to 3 minutes when your name is called. Out of respect for all individuals, please refrain from personal criticisms in an open forum. And there are other details that can be found on 167.3 if you're not familiar. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda as presented. Support?
So motion by Pam, second by Anna. All in favor of the agenda as presented, say aye. 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 All opposed, say the same. Motion to approve the agenda carries. And next on the list is the superintendent comment.
Thank you. Yep, we have a couple of book proposals for. Thank you. We have a couple of book proposals for consideration. The first one is called A Work in Progress by Jarrett Lerner, and this is being requested for our 7th grade ELA classroom. There is what's called a global read aloud, where schools from many locations participate in reading the same book, and then students can enter into discussions with students from other areas and talk about the book. This book is focused on, talks a little bit about student bullying and how students deal with that in a middle school structure. And so Mrs. Fenstermacher, who is their 7th grade ELA teacher, is asking for approval on this book so that our students can participate in this global read aloud. And so we're presenting it to you today, and then there will be action on it in October. Wanted to know if there were any questions regarding the book for this evening. Not seeing any, I'm going to go ahead and continue.
We can also have discussion at that time during the.
Yeah, before a decision is made. And again, I always encourage the board members to reach out to the particular teacher that's putting this forward because they know the materials better than anyone. So feel free to email Mrs. Fenstermacher if you'd like more clarification from her. She'd be happy to share that with you. The next book on the agenda is Mississippi Trial 1955. And I have asked Mr. Vanderlaan to speak to this for us since he's in that building and it's his teacher making the presentation. Making the request.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Cooper, and thank you, board. Really appreciate the time and commitment to this process. And so this is a whole class text that Mr. Tim Harrimans is introducing to his English resource room. And so we just really want to make sure we're following this process. And this process kind of starts with the book was used before, years ago. And in talking with Tim, he said it was a very powerful impact. It really engaged his students in some very productive dialogue, some understanding of context, and really looking at the positive movement forward from that 1955 time. And through that piece, we also talk about the policies that we follow today. And I talked to Tim and said, hey, Tim, if you want to continue with this, a whole class text, we want to make sure we get this in front of Dr. Cooper and the board. And Tim's like, that's great. Yep. And really just respecting the process we have here in APS and with our board. So just a quick summary background of this. Mississippi Trial 1955 is by Chris Crow. It's a historical fiction novel that explores the racial tensions and events surrounding the murder of Emmett Till in 1955 Mississippi. The novel does include racial language and themes to accurately depict the racism and bigotry common to that particular time, especially in that area of the South. The story is told to a perspective, kind of through a lens, of a young white teenager. His name is Hiram Hilbrand, and he's from the North, and he visits his grandfather in Mississippi. This young teen kind of navigates this new environment for him, the segregated South, which is quite racially charged society at that time. He encounters racial slurs, discriminatory attitudes, prejudiced language used by white characters in the book. These racial themes and offensive language reflect kind of that prevalent racism and tolerance towards African Americans in the South during the 1950s. The use of racial language in the book illustrates the unfortunate racism of the era and highlights the necessity for change. To move through that social justice piece of sparking the reflection and discussion about the history of racism and how far society has come in that fight for racial equality and civil rights. And in talking with Tim, we talk about the context and how important that is, especially for our teenagers. They're becoming young adults, but they also have to understand the context and the time and how that language is used. And Tim says he's very careful with how he introduces that. There's a lot of pre-teaching in front of that. And we are using books in the high school that does contain racially charged language, including the N-word. And for context, both Mice of Men, which we probably all read in high school, or To Kill a Mockingbird, it is approved by our board. There are instances of the N-word being used in those books. I think we have a count of 16 instances of the N-word in Mississippi. There's 16 instances of the N-word in Mississippi Trial, but compared to 16 times in Mice and Men and 48 times in To Kill a Mockingbird. So I just want to kind of bring that to our attention that we are working through those very delicate conversations when we introduce this text and content to our high school students. And then I'm here for any questions as well.
If someone were to object to their child reading this book, what would be the alternative or the option?
Yeah, great question. So Tim has a secondary piece that he'll use if students and parents opt out of this assignment. And that can come in the form from the student or even the parent. And of course, Tim will always follow up with the parent. Hey, just want to let you know that we're doing this, and here's a permission slip. And if we have concerns for any reason, I'll find an alternative assignment. He will find one that just won't be a replacement of what the parent probably is concerned about, right? He will make sure he's still hitting the standards that they want to pull for those ELA standards, also the support for our special education students in that resource class, but it will be something that still connects on civil rights, but it will be something that he would share with the parents that would probably be less of maybe that concern of the racially charged language that was used.
Does he have like a study guide or questions that we could, things to kind of frame how the discussions are going to go that we could potentially see? I will write that down. Study guide, material, content, something to take a look at. Sure. Yep. What they would be looking at.
And I know he has that, and he has a whole unit that he's pretty passionate about, just because of how much engagement that he's pulling out of his students with that. It opens up some really robust conversations around context, the history behind it. And in talking with Tim, he said, we make a huge deal about the progress we've made, right? But also we're looking at how can we continue to apply good, right? How can we continue to serve others in society? So he's very, very cautious, but also focusing on the positives of that and how we're moving forward. So I'll just write down study guides and any type of material. I'll get that to you. It's the book and the kind of the unit in of itself, so.
Any other questions? All right, we'll get that material for you. Thank you, Mr.
All right,
Van
thank
Horn.
you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Has everyone read the book?
I've read sections of the book.
But not the book?
Yeah.
No one's read the book.
I can get copies if anybody would like it.
Oh, no, I got my own.
Yep,
I read it.
I can get them if anybody needs them. Again, that's another one. You could feel free to contact Mr. Harriman yourself too directly if you'd like to, but we'll get that information for you. Well, I'll ask him for the parent permission slip. I'll send that to you so you can see what the parents are told about opportunities to opt out. Okay, update on pre-bond planning. So I met with several architectural firms. Weren't sold on necessarily our vision matching their vision. So continued my search. I had an opportunity last Thursday to sit down for a couple of dollars of projects that they've worked on. And so I just felt like after talking with them, that's a company that, again, has experience, but then in talking with others, they felt like TMP has this sort of reputation for being good listeners, right? Like they don't come in with their preconceived ideas of what our high school cafeteria should look like. They want to hear what our thoughts are, and I think that's really what we like. And we talked about the fact that while we want contemporary looks to our buildings, we're function first, right? Like we don't need all the frills and things like that people spend a lot of money on to look like, 21st century classrooms. And we want it so that our teachers have what they need to have solid education, and I think they get that. And I think if you look at the buildings they've done, people are real happy with the way they've created learning spaces. So just feels like the right fit, and so I'll be bringing them to the board in October as our preferred for the pre-bond planning process. So it would be TMP as our architect and Triangle as construction manager.
And do you foresee that, like, with the construction portion, that architecture can be separated? So, like, do you think they would only do the work with pre-bonding? Or because it's different.
The architectural firm is more likely to stay on. Yeah, the construction management, they go out to bid. Typically, the architectural firm you select is the one that you're going to stay with throughout the process because they're the one giving you the designs that you're most likely taking to the bond. So, I agree.
I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's, we're not going to rebid for another
No.
architect after we vote on this one.
Yeah, that's a great point. Slightly different than the construction management because then you do want to see what the cost will people come back with. Okay. Oh, the other thing I wanted to share with that is that I did reach out to Clark Hill and Joseph Urban is the attorney at Clark Hill who will be handling that bond, and kind of the timeline he gave me is that we'll need to make sure that by April 19th, the board has approved the language for the school bond qualifying loan process. And then by May 21st is when we will need to do what they say call to election. So that's the 12th Tuesday prior to the election on August 6th. So just keep that in the back of your mind that by April 19th, we have to have in our minds what it is we're asking for. And so I think that timeline works with what I've seen from both Triangle and TMP, but that's what's out there. And then I just, again, along with that, Joe also is going to be handling our non-homestead renewal. And again, the non-homestead millage it's just a renewal, doesn't raise anybody's taxes. We are required by law to ask for these millages. We're on a 4-year cycle. And it's up next year. The state assumes that you are collecting 18 mills, If you don't collect 18 mills, you're still paying the state 18 mills. You just don't have as much money in your bank account because you're paying it out of your account. So it's important that we have this done. We are going to get this on the presidential primary ballot, which is in February 27th. So in November, we will have a resolution at our board meeting, regular meeting in November, with ballot language for the non-homestead millage renewal. All right. And then the last update that I have is on our curriculum director search. We are holding 6 interviews this Wednesday. We ended up having 18 candidates, but we think we have 6 really solid candidates with good experience, 2 internal candidates on that list. Hopefully on Wednesday, we'll be able to narrow the list to 2 or 3 at the most, and then have a second round of interviews on Monday, October 2nd. I've got committees formed for both days that include administrators, teachers from our department heads. Our academic coach is going to be in on that. So it's a really nice, balanced group of people from different areas, different responsibilities within the district sitting in on those interviews.
Could you repeat those dates again, Garth?
So the Wednesday, the 27th, this week, Wednesday, we're having the first round of interviews.
Okay.
And then hopefully we'll narrow it down and have the second round on the 2nd. And, hopefully come up away with a finalist after the 2nd, and I'll be able to present somebody on the 9th at our board meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions about that? And that's all I have for this evening.
All right, next on the agenda, we have policy 8450.01, protective facial coverings during epidemic events. I was asked to put this on the agenda to discuss the language and the relevancy of, given what's happened since this was written, and kind of open the discussion to what people's thoughts are on this policy that we have.
Yeah, I can go first. So with reports that have come back from like the CDC from the time the pandemic started until now, there's just been a lot of new things changing, and whether masks, just the results of how effective they are. And so when you read this policy, it's just really outdated from the reports that have come out since. So.
What's the date of the last update?
In this?
Yeah, on that.
So April 19 of 2021. It was adopted in 2020. And it sounds like Garth did talk with Neola, and they're possibly investigating this, but they're not fully tuned into Michigan since they have, different districts in other states. So that wasn't maybe on their radar, but I guess they are investigating it and looking into it.
Yeah, they're taking a look at it. So I went to the Neola workshop last Tuesday, and I brought this up, and this was a policy that was born out of the pandemic or whatever, and it was in response to directives from the state of Michigan. And so when we originally adopted it, there was some requirements listed at the bottom, where they list the Michigan compiled laws and that sort of thing. The update in 21 actually took off those requirements because the requirements were removed by MDA, HHS, and the state of Michigan. And so that was the update in 21. And again, I do think that even, about half the language talks about face shields. And that was never even allowable. So even that part of the language,
It's
not just being
different,
outdated,
right.
it was ineffective.
So just for
Yep.
clarification, that update in the 421 was when they removed the state requirement portion.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't modify any language on that, they just took off the requirement to have that. So
Yeah,
now
so-
it's just and you know how some policies we can just choose or not choose because there's no law attached to it.
Yeah.
And this is one that no longer has any state guidance that we have to follow, so we can choose to have it or not to have it.
So that vote wasn't a language change, it was just the acceptance that the Michigan state requirement of it was dropped?
Exactly.
Got it.
I don't want to take anybody's turn. This policy, I think, is probably, it's definitely outdated. Like Anna said, it's a little redundant. It was obviously born out of COVID, but it doesn't, it definitely alludes to just pandemic, epidemic events. In the event that we did end up having something, you know, some sort of, God forbid, another pandemic or epidemic event, I don't know, we wouldn't just default to this policy. We're gonna have to vet what that particular precautions of that epidemic are at the time, so this very well could not apply at that time either. We do have another policy that states, I think it's 8450, that talks about health department direction, and so that's, you know, kind of where some of that would come anyway. Given, you know, recommendation even in hospital settings and things as far as masking goes, I don't see the use for it any longer, so I would be in favor of just rescinding this policy.
Yeah, I guess that was my next question. Are you looking to have language removed or just remove the policy?
I personally would be remove policy.
Yeah.
I'd be in favor of that as well. Yeah, there's no law attached to this either. There's no stamps of any kind. It's just hanging there.
I have a general question for our superintendent. If a student wanted to wear a mask at any time, they can do so.
100%. Yeah, they could wear a mask.
Okay. There's nothing with covering a kid's face during school time and things like that outside of the pandemic situation we had.
Yeah, so towards the end of the requirement period, when it was no longer required and it was optional, we went with masking optional, we still had, I don't know, 100 kids maybe across the district who still wore masks, so,
Okay.
yeah, they have that choice. And teachers as well. I think we still have at least one teacher who still wears a mask every day because they're vulnerable and kids are little germ factories and bring all kinds of stuff to school. So it sounds like we want to put this on the agenda for October 9th then, and as to make a decision, right? Make it
That
an
sounds
action
good.
item.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have 2 more weeks, so if somebody thinks of any other questions between now and then. And I may even hear back from Neola by then,
Okay.
but. All right, I will make sure it's on the October 9th agenda then as an action item.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is public comments. All right, there's nobody on the list, but if anybody else would like to speak, they may. The microphone is yours. All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn at 6:26?
I make a motion to adjourn at 6:26 PM.
All right. Just a second. All in favor of adjourning as presented, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say the same. We are adjourned.